Now, we always started out with a gospel reading, and the purpose of this is that somehow one always will have to judge. So, is that a good pope? Is that a good papacy? Is the church in the right track? And so on. And the question is, where does one get the norm from? So simply to say the pope should join the mainstream, that is what the Europeans and Americans would say. He should be more liberal. And the Africans and the Asians, they say he should be more conservative. He should keep us in the comfort of the old faith and so on. So that is why we have all the African priests here. That is why the bishop is in Kenya now. That is why Father Ken just came back from Kenya. And then, of course, we had in recent years, we had again and again African priests. So, and if we get young ones here, then they are a little bit African and Asian in the sense that they are conservative and would like to have this comfort of faith. And there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. Both groups have their right, and that is what we have to balance somehow. So, nevertheless, we said that the first paradigm of Christianity, which is the Jewish Christian paradigm, is the norm, is the measure by which we can judge more adequately. We call that inner criticism. So if we are critical of whatever is happening, then we have to do that by the Pope's own standards, by the Church's own standards. And these standards are in the first paradigm. And in the first paradigm, these are the Gospels. And in the Gospels, it's the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is the basis of Jesus' teaching. And all the parables and everything else what he says elaborates on the Sermon on the Mount. Now you have two Sermons on the Mount. One is in Matthew, and that is on a real mount, on a little hill above the Sea of Galilee. But then there is another one, the Sermon on the Mount, and it is not on the Mount. It is in flat territory. So the Gospels come from different sources. One was written in Damascus, the other one in Alexandria, at different times, and sometimes there are variations, but which are not very disturbing. The substance is the same. So today we want to take that of Luke there and see what it has to say, and to what extent the papacy so far, the first month, and the church, where the church stands, and what we can say about this in conclusion today. So he then came down with them, that's Jesus, and stopped at a piece of level ground. The Sermon on the Mount should not be on a level ground, but it's on a level ground. Also, the Sermon on the Mount is not one sermon, but it's a collection of sermons which have been put together by the editors through the decades, the first decades, etc. So at a piece of level ground where there was a large gathering of his disciples with a great crowd of people. Now how great these crowds were, the critics today are a little bit critical about this, so they may not have been too amazing. From all parts of Judea, that is in the south, part of Palestine, and then from Jerusalem, the capital of Judea, and from the coastal regions of Tyre and Sidon. That's where Jesus preached sometimes, and where he said this, what is interesting for our homosexual thing, where he said, the man of Sodom will have it better on Judgment Day, because then the man of Sidon and the man of Tyrus, because the men of Tyrus and Sidon did not repent. So that means Jesus was aware that what happened in Sodom was something sinful, but he thought there was the chance of repentance. The tyrants who had come to hear him and to be cured of their diseases. People tormented by unclean spirits were also cured, and everyone in the crowd was trying to touch him because power came out of him that cured them all. So that is why they were attracted and came. Now, here's the inaugural discourse that is called. So an initial discourse, and that is called the Beatitudes. And they are a little bit different in Matthew and in Luke. So let's have that of Luke here. How happy are you who are poor, Yours is the kingdom of God. Now here it says, does not say pure in the spirit. So it is not so idealistic, this one. It is more down to earth. So it says the poor. That means the real poor, physically poor, and not only those pure in spirit. Happy you who are hungry now, you shall be satisfied. Not hungry for justice, but for real food, real hamburgers, real pizzas. Happy you who weep now, you shall laugh. Happy are you when people hate you. That doesn't sound like feeling good. Drive you out, abuse you, denounce your name as criminal on account of the Son of Man. So that makes a difference. The question is, in Christianity, do you accept the Son of Man or don't you? Because you can think of Jesus as another Socrates, as a Jewish Socrates, as a great teacher, and so on. The fascists did this, socialists do that, and so on. But if you do only that, then he's a historical figure, and so on. But if you are a believer, then this is the Son of Man. And Jesus is the only title he gave to himself, was the Son of Man. The Messiah, the Christos, and so on, that were his friends did that later on. That means they were overwhelmed by the force which came from him, the power, and they used the vocabulary of their culture in order to express what they experienced. And one notion which he gave them was the Son of Man, and that comes from Daniel. 2 weeks ago or so, I talked with the rabbi, and I said to the rabbi, what does it mean, Son of Man? Well, he said, it meant that he was out of flesh and blood. Well, he didn't have to tell him, he was walking around in flesh and blood and so on. So the rabbi was a little bit off the target. So it goes back to the prophet Daniel, who used that, and the Son of Man who comes back on the clouds of heaven and so on. That is where the connection is here. So then the curses, unfortunately, rejoice when that day comes and dance for joy. Then your reward will be great in heaven. This was the way their ancestors treated the prophets. You see, it would be nice if, and we talked about this, there's nothing wrong with feeling good. There's nothing wrong with being consoled. We all have to die, we all get sick, we all get unemployed, we all get divorced, and we all need to be comforted and so on. It becomes wrong only if it dulls the conscience. That is the other side. If it dulls the conscience, then we have opium religion. Then we have bad religion. Then we have bourgeois religion. That is the danger, right? So there's nothing wrong with being consoled. But when the consolation, the Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher, says, when you die, you call somebody in, a minister or priest, and just don't call him in just to be consoled. Maybe he can still tell you what you can still make good in the past or so, or now. Maybe you can still do something now. That is important. So the question is not to exclude one and be rigorous or whatever, but it's good to be consoled. But the consolation must not weaken or dull the conscience so that we live and feel good when on the other side of the railroad station there are 10,000 of people sitting in the slums. Or when people are killed in Iraq, or where we killed 1 million people, or now the war in Pakistan, nowhere in Iraq. It may start again. They have asked for military help, and what we did there didn't work, so we may have to go in again, and so on. So that the conscience is awake when these messages come. Today in Los Angeles, another shooting. All these shootings, there's shootings in the Navy Yard, there's shootings in schools, shooting in theaters, and so on. There is something fundamentally wrong, and one cannot sit in the middle of all that and feel good. That is the issue, right? But it's so easy to misunderstood, because when we say, you know, it's not consolation, I mean, we'd all leave, because we all come to some extent in order to be consoled. So there's nothing wrong with it. But it must not dull the conscience. So now, but I say the curses here. The other one, Matthew has no curses. So in that sense, Luke is a little bit more radical. But alas for you who are rich, you are having your consolation now. You have your swimming pools. You have your stock market. You have all this. Those in the slums, they don't have it. One side of Kalamazoo, you have it all. The other side of Kalamazoo, you have nothing. So therefore, you rich people, you have it already. Alas for you who have your fill now, you shall go hungry. Alas for you who laugh now, you shall mourn and weep. Alas for you when the world speaks well of you. This was the way their ancestors treated the false prophets. So the ancestors in Jerusalem killed the good prophets. And Jesus said once, very ironically, he said, who has ever heard that there was a prophet who was not murdered in Jerusalem? So Jesus provoked continually the rich and the powerful until they had a fill of it and until they murdered him. So we must not forget this part. And it goes into stages, and John reports it, where the Jews, he says to the Jews, you think you are the children of Abraham, but you want to murder me. You are not the children of Abraham. You think you are the children of Yahweh, but you want to kill me. Therefore, you are not the children of Yahweh. You are the children of Satan, and so on. So the conflict becomes more and more intense, and then comes the throwing the capitalists out of the temple, which breaks the camel's back, and a few days later, then the execution takes place, and so on. And the rich and powerful have murdered those who challenged them from the poor side ever since. And that produces another antagonism. And we had this discussion where one of us said, I don't like this word, antagonism, and we should not like the word antagonism. It's not something good to have antagonisms. Dualisms are not good. Dualisms are bad. But when you not talk about it, then you cannot remove them. As a matter of fact, all our positivistic teachers don't mention them because they think they cannot resolve them. Therefore, they don't even want to talk about it. But when you have cancer, it is better to talk about it. Maybe you can heal it, and maybe you cannot. But in any case, you have a bigger chance if you talk about it. So something similar here as well. So Allah's the false prophets, and then the differentiation that not everybody who is prophetic, the Pope wants to be prophetic, is the true prophet. They are false prophets, and Jesus says how to differentiate them by their works, by their fruits. By their fruits you will know them. If they say, I'm born again, and then kill 150 people in their prisons, then they are not born again. Or if they say they are born again, and then kill 1 million people in Iraq, they are not born again. This is false. This is untrue. And we must educate ourselves to differentiate between that and not to fall for it. I just think the Germans, my own background there, Hitler, since he followed Keynes and was better than Keynes, he was able to give 6 million people jobs, 6 million people jobs in 1934. That was 10% of the German population. That means Obama, in order to do that, would have to give 30 million people jobs in 1 year. The Germans thought he was the Messiah. Hell for him. So these false prophets, they can do tremendous things. And masses of people fall for them, are fascinated by their appearance, Hitler's appearance on the radio and today on television and so on. It can be very fascinating. So the differentiation between the false prophets and the true ones has to happen all the time. Now, but I say this to you who are listening: love your enemies, love Bin Laden, love whatever is running around there. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who treat you badly. To the man who slaps you on one cheek, present the other cheek. Malcolm X here in Lansing converted to Islam because of this, because he thought one could not hold up the other cheek when the white man comes with the dogs. So to the man who takes your cloak from you, do not refuse your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and do not ask for your property back from the man who robs you. Treat others as you would like them to treat you. That is the golden rule. And the golden rule for Jesus sums up Moses and the prophets. And it is in all living world religions now. Muslims have it, and the Jews have it, and Buddhists have it, and Hindus, even the witches have it. If you love those who love you, what thanks can you expect? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what thanks can you expect? For even sinners do that much. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what thanks can you expect? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount, by the way, more interests. We go to the bank and all in hope that we will get 5 or whatever % interest. He does not even talk about interests here. That means it is the law against interest. What is it? That doesn't. Usury. Yeah, the law against usury, the Muslims have it, and the Jews have it, and the Christians have it, and Jesus had it. So interest taking is a mortal sin. The Catholic Church had, after long struggles, adjusted to that by saying that you can take 2.5% interest. Afterwards, it is a mortal sin. Underneath there, it can be justified as paying the bankers or something like that. But so that was done after the 17th century. After a long time, the Pope gave loans and took interest, and the Church did, and so finally they had to change the norm. So even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. Instead, love your enemies and do good, and lend without any hope of return. That means not only the return, the 10% interest, but the principal sum as well. So the problem, see, Jesus was not an economist, nor was Plato or Aristotle and so on. They didn't really know where the wealth came from. The wealth came from the slaves. The wealth came from the serfs. And the wealth here comes from 250 million workers, not from the characters in Wall Street. They are totally unproductive. The 1% who have $1 million, $2 million a month sometimes income, they don't produce a thing. So it is just turned upside down. So therefore, the question was for them, if you give somebody $100 and you get $110 back, where do the $10 come from? That means instinctively they knew that something was wrong there. I had a student who is even somewhat related to me now through my son's marriage. He was in the business class and suddenly stood up and he said, "You're all so critical of capitalism. We are coming to Western in order to make a lot of money." And I said, "That's fine, you should make a lot of money. So if you want to make $100,000, wonderful." So I said, "Take this dollar which you have in your pocket, take it out." And then he tied a dollar and said, "Who worked for this? If you didn't work for it, maybe your father did. And he gave it to you as a gift, that's fine. But if you have a dollar in your pocket and you have not worked for it, then somebody else worked for it, otherwise it would have no value, and didn't get it." That is the fundamental sin of capitalism. It rests on the appropriation of collective labor. That means the waitress, where I go there and eat my lunch over tomorrow, she gets $25, let's say, just fictitious, and she produces $100. $75 are surplus value, which the one gets who may still work there or may not work in there any longer. The more you become a capitalist, the less you work. That means you move yourself away from the enterprise. So that is what is wrong. Now, no matter how much it would be reformed, it would still, if you change that, according to this here, you don't have capitalism anymore. Okay, so lend without any hope of return. You will have a great reward, and you will be sons of the Most High. So here's the idea of the Son of God. And of course, David was a son of God. The emperors were sons of God. So when we discuss with our Muslim brothers, Jewish brothers, and so on, we have to come from a Christology from below and say, what does that mean when his friends gave him the title Son of God, besides Son of Man, the Son of God? And then the Creed says the only Son of God, so it wants to make something significant. The mystics have undone that again so that we can all become the Son of God. That means in all of us, the Logos can be so united with our inner spirit that this union is even more intense than the union of our body and our soul. That is what Meister Eckhart would say, from which the present Pope has learned a lot. And then compassion, that also comes from Meister Eckhart. God is compassion. Be compassionate as your Father is compassionate. Do not judge, and you will not be judged yourself. Do not condemn. So this is, again and again in nature, we see that nature cannot live up to its own rationality. You have a calf with two heads. You have landslides. Some people think because the world is 14 billion years old, it's getting old, it's falling apart. So a landslide comes down and wipes out a whole village. Or tsunami kills 200,000 people and so on. That is nature not at one with itself. It's nature in conflict with itself. It ruins itself. Or when the heavenly body falls into the Caribbean, and 75%, 250 million years ago, 75% of all vegetation and animals was annihilated. So therefore, these are accidents in which nature is alienated from itself. But that happens to us too. For instance, when we talk about the state which is, so Jesus says, a state which is split in itself cannot survive, and so on. So when or a family, family should be one with itself, but it can be dysfunctional. The dysfunctional family. Social worker comes, that's family Siebert, and then they throw dishes against each other and so on. This is not a family. So it is a family, but it's not a family. It's a family at odds with itself. Or a state. I had a long discussion with the federal government for 2 summers that the state of Michigan was a culturally failed state. That means it doesn't educate its citizens. So they have again the contradiction between what the state is to do in terms of its own notion, idea, and what in reality it does. And we saw that in the last 3 weeks or so, where a government shuts itself up because the Congress is part of the government. And so they close up the government of which they are themselves a part, but are sure that they pay their own salaries. Only the 800,000 don't get the salaries, little bureaucrats, and so on. So that is where we can measure things by themselves. That is called the natural law position, which the Catholic Church has as a part of the tradition, besides the revelation. Okay, be compassionate as your Father is compassionate. Do not judge, and you will not be judged yourself. Jesus did judge all the time, of course. He judged the Pharisees because they were hypocrites and empty graves and so on and so on. He judged the rich and so on. So it is not, we cannot even live in society without judging. Not only every judge judges, every teacher judges all the time, and without being conscious or so we do. But there is one thing which is connected with compassion now. That means nature can be powerless to live up to itself. People, states, families can be powerless to live up to themselves. They want to be good. They want to put it right. They want to make it functional. And then they have a dysfunctional government after all, and so on. It is there where one should not use now norms as a weapon in order to down people even more. So one should be compassionate and lift people up. And so on. That is what the Pope, by the way, means when somebody talked about homosexuals and he said, "Who am I to judge?" And when one takes the context away, then the whole thing is missed. The context was that the Pope thought that God was at work, providence was at work, also in the person who had an abortion and the person who got divorced or the person who whatever happened. And therefore, who are we to judge what God wants to do in the life of this person? God can transform something negative into an instrument for something good. So therefore, what right do we have to judge what he is doing? Okay, will not judge yourself, and you will not be condemned yourselves. Grant pardon, and you will be pardoned. For instance, Snowden there, it would be a very good thing if the president could pardon him. That would be a good occasion for his own lifting up. Give, and there will be gifts for you. The full measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap, because the amount you measure out is the amount you will be given back. And then the last thing here, he also told a parable, and so we leave that out and get to our point here. Okay, this is the measure by which we discuss what we want to discuss, namely the future of the church and the papacy and where we are now. I summed up there what we did in the past. There we saw in our third discourse that Pope Francis does not stand for an opium religion, which only consoles and makes us feel good, but at the same time dulls the conscience, so that we do not see the antagonisms in civil society, which of course are painful. We have, I have a roadmap there for my students. There are about 56 of these antagonisms, and none of them is resolved. So that is painful, and we all feel that. But the question is, if we really want to get over them, but want to resolve them, then we have to analyze them, we have to understand them. The Pope wants to go beyond bourgeois religion. So what we have around here is, to a large extent, bourgeois religion. It is opium religion. It is a religion, as Jefferson said, people should read the Bible, then we can govern them better. It is religion which is instrumentalized in order to control people. Like Skinner would say, religion is social control, and so on. And many sociologists, psychologists say this. Unfortunately, there is a truth to that. And so Jesus, in Jesus' case, is the least social control ideas, but it is strong in Mohammed. It is strong in Moses. It is strong in other leaders as well. So, so we have to admit this, but that is not the purpose. The purpose of Christianity or Islam or whatever is not to control people. It is to liberate people, to redeem people. And when a certain class, like the third estate, the bourgeoisie in this country, uses religion that way, or simply for charity where justice is not given, where people do not get jobs, and therefore they have no food, and therefore we have now today, from today on, we have 40 million people who will not get food stamps. So this is where the conscience then should rebel. And if it doesn't, then something is wrong. That means then we have bourgeois religion, or we have opium religion. So the Pope wants to go beyond bourgeois religion, as St. Francis did, and we talked about this. He threw his clothes in his father's face and was naked on the place there in protest against the first steps of capitalism in Italy, and then in Europe, and finally later on here. So, and also Master Eckhart, who is the great teacher of the present Pope through Ignatius of Loyola and Faber and Canisius and so on, and then Ignatius of Loyola himself, and then also Thomas More, the patron saint of this here, who wrote the Utopia, in which he says very clearly that one has to be a communist in order to enter the kingdom of God. Sell everything and follow me. That is the issue. And then we also have Thomas Müntzer. Thomas Müntzer, that is a very sad case. We Catholics and the Protestants have used our best energies to repress him for centuries. Thomas Müntzer was a Catholic priest in Wittenberg, and when the farmers were rebelling against the feudal lords because they took their hunting rights and their fishing rights, and they had the Nox Prime Noctis, Lex Prime Noctis, the right of the first night. That means they could sleep with the wife, with the bride of every farmer in their village, and every first son or daughter was his own product. When they protest against all that, Thomas Müntzer, who was their priest, then made himself available and became their leader, a very prophetic person, and he trained them, and he fought against Charles V, and Charles V brought his army out, a newly established army from Italy under Frundsberg, a new type. They didn't carry any armor anymore, only the shoulders and the sexual parts were protected. They had long spears with which they could stab the knights, and the knights would fall, and they needed a crane to pull them up again, and so on. So they came up and they killed 100,000 farmers in one summer, in the summer 1525. And Thomas Müntzer was caught, and he was tortured, and he was decapitated, and his head was put on the door of Mühlhausen in Thuringia, where also Luther came from, and where also Master Eckhart came from. So the daughter then the wife kept his head here. By the way, so priest did in the 60s and 70s. He got married and had 2 children, and we don't know what happened to his wife and to the children and so on. But sometimes he is seen as the patron of the bourgeois revolution, but it is much more the patron of the socialistic revolution, which comes after the bourgeois revolution, because the bourgeois revolution did not take into consideration the fourth estate, the workers, and you have that all day long here in this country. We don't even have a Workers' Party. We don't even have a Labour Party. We don't even a Social Democratic Party. You have two bourgeois parties. So, and they are frozen. So that is Thomas Müntzer, and it was then Marx and his Engels who then remembered him, and then scholars of the 20th century like Ernst Bloch then remembered him, but we haven't remembered him still now today. There's a man who unbelievably believed in God's providence, and that God would be just, and that these injustices which the farmers suffered under the feudal lords, that this would be overcome. Okay, so that as far as a summary, and now we come to our time diagnosis. And we want to pick out a few short things there. Rafael Cruz suddenly appeared in the public sphere. He is the father of Senator Cruz, who led the whole attack on the government shutdown because of the Affordable Health Act, or what is called by the enemies the Obamacare. So he came from Cuba originally. That means he has to be Catholic, but he must have changed to some evangelical group, because he is a minister today, evangelical minister, Protestant minister, and then he spoke in recent days. He went to Canada immediately, and then from Canada he came into the States with his son, who is now this senator there. Recently he compared Obama with Castro, and he says he does the same thing like Castro, and Castro somehow, what did he say? Castro, he governs by edict, and which Obama hasn't done for a long time. And which presidents do sometimes, and it's always painful if that has to happen. But Castro did not govern by edict. Castro made a revolution. He threw out the gangster whom we had there before, and we knew that he was a gangster, but he was our gangster. And we have these gangsters all over the place because they have to make sure that we get cheap labor from there and cheap resources. So we had the fascist DM in Vietnam, and there we wanted to have their rubber, and then we wanted to have from El Salvador, we saw the movie there, we wanted to have the coffee, and then we wanted from Iraq, we wanted to have the oil, and we got 2/3 of their oil wealth, and now they rebel again, and we have to go in again and secure them. By the way, we want to sell them fighter planes. What the hell should the Sunnis and the Shiites do with fighter planes? Neither of them can fly, and you cannot even bomb anything. They bomb themselves, they blow themselves up, and always take 30 Sunnis or 30 Shiites with them. So, but that we don't want to talk about that. But this is one thing here there about Cuba and the socialistic revolution there. Castro is made into a bad man there. Castro was a Catholic from a Catholic lawyer family. It was not a socialistic revolution in the beginning. The Baptists even fought with him in the Orange province. And then when we put the embargo on the little tiny country, then he tried to find friends, and then he found friends in Russia, and then it became, afterwards, it became a socialistic revolution. So that is what was in the news there. And also what came out was this issue. He said that this was a Christian country, and Obama was not a Christian, and so on. That comes up all the time again, and I think it's important that Catholics at least know what is going on there. This country was a Christian country in the sense that the colonies were under a state church, which was the Anglican Church, which is now the Anglican Communion of the Archbishop of Canterbury. When the separation came between the Boston bourgeoisie and the London bourgeoisie, because the Americans could not go into Parliament and could not make laws, therefore they didn't want to pay taxes and so on. It was not a revolution, it was a separation in the same class. It was a conflict in the same bourgeoisie, the homeland bourgeoisie and the colonial one. They didn't have the same right. So you could say the colonies were Christian because they had an Anglican state church. But the Constitution changed that. The Constitution threw the state church into civil society. So from that time on, our state, and it was the first state, has no religious legitimation whatsoever. The name of God is not in the Constitution. The name of God is in the Declaration of Independence. But that is the name from Deism, a new religion which Voltaire and Rousseau invented. in order to legitimate the French Revolution against the Catholic king. Because when you make a revolution and you have people there who have learned the kingdom of God's grace, you cannot make a revolution. You have to demythologize the king first before you can guillotine him. Therefore, the bourgeoisie invented a new religion, Deism. That is our civil religion. It means that God has created the world. And then he left. So therefore, for all practical purposes, the world is atheistic and God is worldless. So that covered all kinds of functions. One function was a very serious one, and that was in 755, there was a tsunami in Lisbon, which killed thousands of people, an earthquake and a tsunami. And all Europe was shaken. How can God let something like this happen, and so on? The deistic answer was it has nothing to do with God. It's the old world. It's cracked up. So therefore, don't blame God for it. So it helped. Then it had this function to legitimate the revolution. Then it had the function that you could colonize the whole globe without listening to a God who tells don't steal, don't murder, don't lie about stealing and murdering all the time and so on. Because God is there, but he has left the world. To whom? To the bourgeoisie. Now, therefore, they could find cheap labor and cheap resources wherever they want to. They went to Africa and got it, and they went to Asia and got it. They went to the Near East and got it, and we have the whole mess there. Libya was an Italian colony, and so on and so on. You can go from one country to the other. So we must not forget this when these things happening now, because history is gone, but it's also not gone. It is always present. What you have done 20 years ago can suddenly face you again. Suddenly you had forgotten it all, but suddenly it's there. So one cannot simply separate past, present, and future. They are interconnected with each other. So, nevertheless, now, insofar as there were many different religious groups coming here, but they were not only Christians. Detroit is full of Muslims. Must be 1 million Muslims in Detroit, and so on. And there are a lot of Polish Christians there, of course, but there are also Buddhists and whatever there. So civil society took in these people, and some states were almost Catholic, like Pennsylvania or Maryland or whatever. So others were like the Mormons and so on. So in that sense, you could say, you know, it was a religious country or so. But as far as the state organization is concerned, it was never a Christian country. It was the product of the Enlightenment, of the encyclopedists from whom the Constitution comes. Those guys in Lisbon, in Philadelphia, they did just not make that up by sitting there while their slaves were waiting outside with their horses. They stood in a long tradition which had worked that out. The Third Estate, the bourgeoisie, worked that out with the help of bishops, with the help of noblemen. Some of them couldn't even write. They were shopkeepers and so on. So the Constitution is unbelievably wonderful. It's now a little bit old because civil society has blown up and the state has not evolved adequately. Not only the states, but the federal state has not evolved adequately. Therefore, we would need now a constitutional assembly, but we cannot do this with this madhouse there, in which we have now, with about 17% in the House, and then of the Republican Party. So the Republican Party has to recover. It has to recover. It has to find itself again before one could even think of something like this. So now, if the Europeans, they think also sometimes we are a Christian country, but when they think that, they don't think of our economy, they don't think of our polity or our families and divorce rate or whatever. They think of Carter. They think of President Carter. They think who had a peanut farm, and you see little houses standing there for the poor and so on. So Carter is a Christian fellow. Or, of course, Martin Luther King. That makes him Christian. So therefore, but we have to be very differentiated when we say this is a Christian country, because how could a Christian country have voted food stamps away from 40 million people? A Christian country which knows the story of the Good Samaritan. The Germans have even a Samaritan law. When you drive and there's an accident, you have to get out and help this guy. If you don't help, they put you into prison for 5 years. So we don't have anything like this. So a Christian country would have something like this. Not that Germany is a Christian country. So, but we could not have 40 million people in the slums if we were a Christian country. We could not have 7.5% unemployed if we were a Christian country. See, the Christianity is not, that is what has happened to us, and why the Brotherhood, the Islamic Brotherhood, is so frightened stiff that the same thing will happen to them which happened to us. What happened to us? Separation of church and state. That means privatization of religion. That means secularization of the family, of the economy, of the polity, of the historical process, of international law, etc. So that is what they are afraid of. That is why they do jihad. Jihad means the defense of Islam against the attacks from the West, from the Enlightenment, the bourgeois Enlightenment and the socialistic Enlightenment. Okay, so that was one thing there which was in the news. Now to our Pope there. Let's see what he did there. The Pope said recently the Church should not supervise sex, particularly abortion, contraception, homosexuality, while neglecting at the same time the duty to help those who are poor and marginalized, voting down the food stamps, and so on, and so on, and so on. There's no end to it. So now, we must understand the other side too. Why did they vote down the food stamps? Because they think work is honorable. Of course work is honorable. So these people should work, and then they would have food and wouldn't need food stamps. You have to get into the brains, even of the most outrageous people. So that is a part of love. When you love your neighbor and even your enemy, you have to get into his heart, how he's thinking. They think these 48 million people are welfare loafers. They are irresponsible. They are lazy. In all of us, there is a pull toward the chimpanzees where we are coming from, and there is a pull toward heaven, upward, and so on. But these are the people who, like the orangutans, would like to sit on a tree and just eat the bananas falling down or whatever. Or looking at big television screens, they have to be big, on the couch and just wait for the food stamps. So, but one cannot legislate on the basis of the abuse of certain things. But we must agree with them that people should work. But who should give them work? Not the government. Even Romney said that once. He said, it's not the function of the state to give jobs. Very good. Only he talked for 2 years that he would give jobs to people if he was the president. And he blamed the president Obama that he had not given jobs. The contradictions in these people are hardest to think through. How somebody can be in the public sphere and talk such unbelievable nonsense, and worse of it, that nobody even notices it. But he was right. The state does not have to do create jobs. Who then? The capitalist has to create jobs. That means he accumulates a surplus value. This surplus value he has to apply to labor again. That makes him a job creator. Well, where are the job creators? They obviously haven't created them. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 7.5%, which is millions of people. So now, if you say they should not have food stamps, then give them jobs. And give them real jobs. Because in all these big business around here, they pay maybe $8.50 or whatever. And we have more trouble than before. So that is of course right. Something must be done. But again, there, what should be done there? When I worked with the church, I had those cases where suddenly the head of an orphanage in Germany abused his boys there, and it was an unbelievable scandal and dark and bad. And the bishop came, and the priest regretted very much what he did, and he wanted to work in a mine as a miner to do penance for it. But the bishop did what they always did. He put him into a monastery, and then he stays in the monastery for a year, and they think that when he prays hard and so on, he will not be a pedophile anymore afterwards, and that is an illusion. But we have also, the bishops go to psychoanalysts today, and after 2 years of analysis, they also think the guy is healed, and then he does it again, and so on. So there was one case where Ratzinger had a problem, and he was still inquisitor there. The Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, and all these pedophile things came to him. And there was a priest from here, he was maybe 30 years old, and the bishop said he had to defrock him, had to laicize him. And Ratzinger said, no, don't do it. He is a young man, don't ruin his whole life, and so on. So the bishop obeyed, and he didn't ruin his life, but he did it again. So then the bishop said, I can't hold him anymore, and then he laicized him. Then he got mad, and then when he was mad, he again did the pedophile stuff. So then they put him into prison. Now he has come out again and so on. But the clergy, like the medical doctors and the professors and so on, and more than that, they are a closely bound together group, and they help each other out. The lawyers help each other out, and the medical doctors help each other out. So that doesn't excuse anything, not at all. It just makes it understandable that then Ratzinger is not exactly a bad man when he says, well, let's give him another chance before we ruin another life or whatever. But it doesn't excuse it. So there's also the thing that the church did that in its own courts, and they did somehow give something to the victims, but much less than secular courts do. So along the Atlantic coast, the Canadian coast, there happened this thing in many different parishes, and people lost their faith and just left Catholicism and so on. So, and then they went the first time to secular courts, and they were rewarded greatly by the secular courts. And the priests were broken. They went to prison, and then they were thrown out of prison and were in the slums of Toronto. Toronto slums are nicer than the American slums, but it's still a miserable place. Okay, so mafia, then atheists can be good, Pope said. Then everybody was upset about that atheists can be good. The old prejudice was that if you are not a religious person, you are a chimpanzee. You are an animal. Well, that hasn't been true ever, I think. It was just a self-defense of the believers. So, of course, secular people and atheists can be very ethical people, of course. Let's see that Marx was, maybe one never knows exactly if they are, but let's say Marx and Freud, two Jews, and became atheists or whatever, but at the same time they worked on a very high ethical level. So, and that is for millions of other people. So the Catholic position is a little bit easier because Catholics do not radicalize the original sin. So therefore the sin has wounded us, but we still have our memory, we still have our will, and we still have our intellect. And therefore we can do some good things even if we are not in the state of grace. Luther, Father Luther, he radicalized this whole thing, that our intellect and our will are totally destroyed, and that reason is a whore. You can use it for everything. You can, if you just listen to the politicians, you can justify everything with reason. There are always good things on one side, the other side, and so on. So therefore Luther was rather desperate, and when he then practically allowed the Prince of Hessen to divorce his wife, and the Roman Catholic Church did not allow Henry VIII to divorce, and so that has something to do with that. Luther knew his Bible. He knew that you cannot get divorced according to the Bible. But he said, we're so rotten, and a little bit more rotten or whatever doesn't make much of a difference. So he didn't say that the divorce of Henry VIII was, this one, or the Prince of Hessen was a good thing, such, but he simply was very much impressed by the tragedy of the human existence, the powerlessness that we cannot be who we are, that we cannot be identical with ourselves, that we are alienated from ourselves. And so he taught, like Augustine, everything is grace. Grace means to be accepted by God in spite of the fact that we are totally unacceptable. And the only thing what we have to do is to accept our acceptance. And then that is what our Protestant brothers say when they say, take Christ in your life, and Christ is your Savior, and so on, and then you can bar Iraq or whatever. But that is not what Luther said, really. The Catholic propaganda said that, take grace and then do all the rotten things you want to. Luther never said this. the good works there should flow from faith and from love and from hope and so on. So it's not a free freedom to do bad things or whatever. So that's a misunderstanding, it's a misinterpretation of the reformers. Okay, so that is about atheism, as atheists can be good, and there is of course the whole thing if you have to be in the church in order to be saved. A Jesuit in the New England states was excommunicated by the church maybe a few decades ago because he said that nobody could be saved outside of the church. The church says, that the normal way to be saved is a member of the Catholic Church. But the church knows also all the difficulties which are implied. Let's see where you have this McCain there, our Senator McCain. He bombed Hanoi. They killed 2 million Asians with their bombardments, and he was shut down because the Russians gave rockets to Hanoi, and half of our air fleet was shut down, and then the other half the next time when we tried again, and then we stopped the war. So, but when he came down, he was caught, and when these pilots came down, and their mother maybe gave him a cross, so there was a cross hanging there, and so there's a Christian now. The Christian, you just killed all our children here and bombed into the Stone Age. And so how can a communist then possibly, or Buddhist there, can possibly see that Christianity is the way to salvation? It's not possible. It's psychologically and sociologically impossible. And then what? Well, he must be saved through communism, or he must be saved through Buddhism, or Shintoism, or whatever he is. So that is the position at the moment. So it is as well as, yes, normally you should be through the church, you will be saved. And they don't even call Methodist Church yet, which is, I hope he will change the tone so that we say our brothers down there, the Baptists, that's a church, and not just a denomination or a sect or something like that. But we do a lot. But it has something to do with this borderline thing. Okay, so we are saved because we are members of the church, but there are, I think I told you that story there, that the American court wanted my pastor to be witness because a Nazi had killed an American pilot, and so but the guy who, the Nazi came, also harmed the priest a lot for 12 years, but they talked with each other, and then the American court knew that, and they wanted the priest to be witness, and the priest said, I cannot say anything, because that was the seal of confession. And the court, the American judge said, but he is a Protestant. And he said, it doesn't matter. He is a baptized Christian. As a baptized Christian, he may be a little bit dead branch of the Corpus Christi Mysticum, but he is a Christian, and therefore when he goes to confession, that is valid, and I cannot talk. And they had to bring a communist in, who then did the witness instead. It happened in Frankfurt at the end of the war. Now, another thing, the Pope's attacks against capitalism. He has attacked capitalism several times. When you look at the Morris movie about Detroit, Capitalism, a Love Affair, you'll see, to your astonishment, that there are 2 priests and 1 bishop, Gumbleton, who said that capitalism is absolutely evil. I had never heard that before. It's not a real, Catholics would always say, well, it's evil, but it also has some good sides to it. Some people have swimming pools and so on. But no, it's absolutely evil. And older priests, beards and gray hair, and they have, for 50 years or whatever, practiced in Detroit. It is absolutely evil. And at least one has to see, why that is so, and why they are so upset about this. And it cannot be from outside. One can only say they compare what the Gospels say with that what they experience in their neighborhood, and that brings about that thing. So the Pope called capitalism savage. Capitalism savage. That means that it belongs to the most primitive time of chimpanzee existence. So he is against the austerity program, but not against saving, I think. So we have that increase. So increase the government collapse and all kinds of things, because the austerity. You know how that came about. They bought, Greece bought a derivative from Wall Street. In order to become members of the European Union, you have to be debt-free. So they bought this derivative and it looked beautiful, and then a few months later they found out that it was absolute fraud. It collapsed and they were in the Union now, and now they cannot get out of the Union anymore, but the debts are there. So Germany bailed them out. So then, but Germany imposed, well, because their own taxpayers in Germany made a lot of noise, so Merkel then increased the austerity program, and then people went to the street, and some of them became fascist, and others became socialist, and they beat each other in Athens and so on. Something similar happened in Italy. They had a business, they bring the businessmen in. It's the worst what you can do, to bring a businessman into a state office. So, because civil society and the state are two different things. In civil society, you are bourgeois. You are concerned with your own property and backyard and stocks and so on. In the state, you are concerned with the common good. You have to put even all your stuff in a trust fund and so on in order to be free and that you can act really as a politician. So there are two different words, to be a citoyen, a citizen, and to be a bourgeois. One is concerned with this particular good. The other is concerned with the common good. There's a world of difference between the two. So, so the Pope is angry about that the austerity program then imposes this austerity to the masses of the people, and the billionaires who are on the ships and so on, they get away from it and get richer. Like, you know, the upper class here, the 1% did not suffer very much in 2008, and then they got even a lot of tax money afterwards. So it is these horrendous type of things. So then it's opposed to the World Bank. The World Bank in Paris is our establishment, and it has supported the idea of civil society. So in 1989, there was a counter-revolution against the Soviet Union. There had been one in 1920 where 12 capitalistic countries marched into the Soviet Union and wanted to kill Lenin, and where they were beaten. And there are still 8,000 Americans buried in Murmansk from that time. Then the capitalistic ruling class sent Hitler there. He almost made it. He had a wonderful, where I go now, in 2 weeks I go to Kiev, and there was a dacha. He had a dacha there from which he guided the operations against the Volga and so on. So, and he almost made it when he was the dacha there, but then the Sixth Army was destroyed by General Zhukov, a wonderful dialectician. And so, and that broke his backbone. Not the American Air Force killing all the people at home there. It was Zhukov who killed him. If you kill a whole army, then that's the end of it. And in Kursk, all his tanks were destroyed by Zhukov and so on. So that failed completely. But 1989, the third counter-revolution worked under Reagan. And it worked to a large extent because of the World Bank. Because when Nazism was beaten in Yugoslavia and elsewhere, then all these governments had to make a decision. One decision was to put people on a diet, on austerity, for another 30 years or generation and so on, in order to have primitive capital accumulation. And many people like Tito and so on were not able. In Romania, he was the only one who did it, to not take any money from the World Bank, and but then they killed him in the end because the austerity was so severe. So Tito and others, they thought people suffered enough now with the war and all that. I cannot say they should pull their belt together again another generation. And then they went to the World Bank and they got money there. And then they built hotels, and all the beautiful hotels along the Adria or whatever. And then now they had to pay it back. And they were simply not productive enough to pay it back. So sometimes they had to take money up again in order to pay for the interest. They were not Jesus people. So, and so they got deeper and deeper spiraled into debt, which was an important factor for the collapse of the Soviet Union, and why the neoliberal counter-revolution worked and why the other two had not worked and so on. So, and then, of course, Reagan spent $3 trillion for armament, and the Soviet Union was not willing to do the same thing with rubles and so on. And if they had done, the atomic clock in New York was already 10 minutes to 12 and so on. We can be happy, otherwise they would have started to take Baltimore out and take Kiev out, back and forth and so on, and we would have had hell already. So, so this, as far as the Pope is concerned, and the World Bank, they have instituted innumerable organizations, and they have idealized the idea of civil society, because the counter-revolution meant that all these nations had to go back again where they were. They had rebelled against civil society because of the class oppression and the inequality and so on, and became socialists. Now, the revolution, counter-revolution meant that they went back to that. So the World Bank idealized this thing. You know, civil society is ethical, and we share, and free associations, and so on and so on. And they fell for it. So when I go to Kiev now, not to Kiev, but to Yalta, where I have a conference there will be scholars from Russia and from the Ural and Central Asia and so on. And it will come up there again, this civil society. So the Pope is not the only one. There are others who are upset about this.
Great.
Yes?
It's 1:45. Did you
Okay, yeah, we want to have that, yeah. So let me just look at the first encyclical which he wrote, is Light of Faith. Now, that is really an encyclical of Benedict still. And you see that the two work together. Benedict is still alive, he sits in the Vatican, and so, you know, whatever he will do, Benedict may be silent, but Benedict is there, he is present, and so on. So Benedict thought of a trilogy. One encyclical he wrote about love, then he wrote one about hope, and now this one is about faith. So this Pope completed what the other one had done. And that shows us that he is not so far away from it. So then we have some challenges which are coming up, and all these numbers, and you can read that for yourself. Then he has to deal with the priestly scandal there. He must reform the Vatican finances, bureaucracy there, which is an abominable condition, because it's medieval and it's burdened by aristocratic privileges and by the Machiavellian instincts. Their purpose sanctifies the means and so on. It's all rotten to the ground, and how this is all to be reformed is quite questionable. He must respond to the many Catholics in North America and Europe asking for more liberal interpretations of doctrine like homosexuality and so on, as well as to Catholics in Africa and Asia who prefer the conservative comforts of the faith. And he must respond to the liberation theology, which the predecessors, the two, have repressed there, and very painful. Some of the liberation theologians, that's what we see in the movie there, the 6 Jesuits, that the movie concentrates on 6 Jesuits who were murdered there, and then five sisters, and 2 of them were my students in Marinol, were killed, and you will see them there in the movie. So something has to be done about this. Romero should be mentioned. Rome does not mention Romero. They keep him quiet because he did not cooperate with the fascist government. That's why they killed him. So then predecessors here, and you can look at this, and no quietism, that is really important. So the Pope was a little bit quietistic. When the whole fascist thing happened in his country, he read philosophy and so on, and was not an activist, and he maybe should have acted also as a cardinal to protect his priests, and he didn't do that. So according to the New Testament, quietism is out of the question. So the Sermon on the Mount is not there, as our Protestant brothers say, in order to show us how evil we are, but the Sermon on the Mount is there so that we do act in a small way, however we can do that. And now we come to this movie, and the movie is Enemies of War, and we want to see a few scenes because that was a very shocking thing. I don't know if you remember this. There were 6 Jesuits, like the Pope. A Jesuit always has 2 professions. He has 6 years theology, and then he has 6 years in something else, medicine, economics, and so on.
Major funding for
These
this
6
program.
had all economics, and so they could really go down the coffee. When you drink your coffee tomorrow, then remember this movie there.